The air in the dining room was thick with the scent of turkey and gravy, a reminder of the family gathering we were supposed to be enjoying. Outside, snow fell quietly, blanketing Oak Park in a soft, wintry embrace. The fire crackled behind me, casting long shadows on the walls. It was the kind of scene you'd see on a holiday card: warm light, family together, and the world outside frozen in a peaceful hush. But there was nothing peaceful about the tension in the room. I watched Fern, her face lit up by the glow of her phone screen, as though nothing in the world could demand her attention more than whatever was on that screen. Her fingers moved across the device, swiping, tapping, completely unaware of the moment unfolding in front of her. I tried not to let the frustration seep into my voice, but it did anyway. It had been building up for weeks, months, maybe even longer. I had been doing everything I could to help, to make sure they were okay. And yet, here I was, standing at the dinner table, my heart sinking. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. My fingers clenched around the envelope I was holding. I'd spent hours deliberating over this, making sure I was doing the right thing. It wasn't much, just a check for $5,000, but I thought it might ease the strain a little, clear some of her credit card debt, something to show that I still cared, that I was still trying, even though everything had begun to feel like a one-way street. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said, my voice a little too hopeful, too thin. I was trying to make a gesture, something that might remind her of all the times I'd helped her, helped all of them. Maybe she'd appreciate it. Maybe it would finally make a difference. But no. Fern didn't even flinch when I handed her the envelope. She barely even looked up. Her eyes stayed fixed on her phone, unfazed. "Thanks," she said without much interest, her tone as flat as her gaze. The word was a reflex, something she said out of politeness, but there was no warmth in it, no connection. I forced a smile, though it felt like I was forcing my own heartbeat to keep going. She reached for the envelope without lifting her eyes from the screen, tearing the paper with a swift, sharp motion. It was like watching someone tear through wrapping paper on Christmas morning, but the excitement, the joy, was absent. I could see it in the way she opened it, the way her fingers slid over the check. It wasn't a gift to her. It was just another thing to dismiss. I watched her face as she scanned the check. No surprise, no gratitude, not even curiosity. The lack of reaction stung more than I cared to admit. My chest tightened. This wasn't how I imagined this moment going. I wanted her to see the effort I'd put into it, the sacrifice behind it. I wanted to see her smile, maybe even say thank you, something to make it feel like my sacrifices had meant something. "That's it?" Fern's voice was suddenly sharp, but not in the way I had hoped. She looked at the check with indifference, her eyes flicking over the numbers as if it meant nothing. $5,000? I could feel my throat tighten. My hands shook slightly, but I clenched them into fists, trying to hold it together. $5,000 was a lot of money. It wasn't just a random number. I had worked for it. I had spent years paying off debts, fixing things around the house, making sure she had what she needed when things got tough. But all I could hear now was her voice, flat, dismissive. "It's enough to clear most of your credit card debt," I muttered, trying to explain. "I thought it might help." Fern didn't respond immediately. She didn't even look at me. Her eyes stayed glued to the check, as if it were the most boring thing she'd ever seen. "You know, Dad," she said slowly, her voice dripping with something I couldn't quite place. "The best gift you could give us would be if you just disappeared." The words hit me like a slap to the face. They were simple, almost casual, like she was talking about a preference for dessert or where to sit at the table. But they cut through the air with an edge that left me breathless. I felt the world shift around me, like the ground had suddenly opened up beneath my feet. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. My hands started shaking, and I gripped the back of the chair to steady myself. I glanced around the table. Vernon had frozen mid-cut, his knife suspended in mid-air. Sophie's fork was halfway to her mouth, but she had stopped moving, her eyes wide. Alex's thumbs had stopped scrolling on his phone, and he looked up, confused. Nobody said anything. It was like the world had gone mute, the air too thick to breathe. I opened my mouth, trying to find my voice, but nothing came out. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, a tightness I couldn't shake. How was this happening? How had everything changed so quickly? "Dad?" Fern's voice snapped me out of my daze, cold and cutting. She finally looked up from her phone, her eyes locking onto mine. They were colder than the snow falling outside, colder than anything I had ever seen in her. "You heard me. The best gift would be when you're no longer around." It was like she had torn a veil away from my eyes, and I saw everything clearly for the first time. I could see the resentment in her eyes, the deep well of bitterness that had been building for years. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't just the check or the house or the things I had done for them. It was everything. I wanted to scream at her, to demand what the hell she meant, but my voice felt distant, as if it belonged to someone else. My heart hammered in my chest. The room felt smaller, suffocating. The cold in Fern's eyes was like a slap across my face. The fire crackled in the background, a harsh reminder of the warmth that was supposed to be here, of the family that was supposed to care. But none of that mattered now. None of it. My legs felt heavy as I stood up from the table, the chair scraping across the floor behind me. Every movement felt slow, as though the weight of her words had physically anchored me to the ground. "I think I need some air," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. My hands trembled at my sides, but I forced myself to walk, to move, to get out of that room before I did something I would regret. Fern's voice followed me as I turned toward the kitchen. "Dad, you need to hear this," she called after me, but I couldn't bring myself to turn around. I couldn't bear to hear any more. The words were like stones, sinking deeper into my chest with every passing second. I stepped into the kitchen, the fluorescent lights above flickering to life as I crossed the threshold. It was sterile in here, the bright, harsh light too much after the soft, warm glow of the dining room. The smell of turkey and gravy lingered in the air, mixing with the sterile scent of cleaning supplies and old cabinets. I didn't even notice the reflection of myself in the window at first. But when I did, I froze. The man in the reflection was a stranger. His face was older than it had been the last time I looked. The lines around his eyes were deeper, his hair grayer. I barely recognized him. I splashed cold water on my face, hoping it would shake me out of the haze. It didn't. It only made it worse. The cold water stung against my skin, but it didn't erase Fern's words. The best gift would be when you're no longer around. I stood there for a long time, my hands on the sink, staring out the window. Outside, the snow fell steadily, blanketing the world in white, like a fresh start. But inside, everything felt frozen. The world, my world, was slowly crumbling around me. I turned away from the sink and walked toward the door that led to the backyard. It wasn't much, but I needed space. I needed air. I stepped outside, the cold hitting me like a slap. The snow crunched beneath my feet as I walked down the small path in the yard, my breath coming out in sharp, visible bursts. I looked around, seeing the familiar sight of the house I had built, the place I had worked so hard to make a home. It was still standing, still there, but it felt different now. The walls no longer felt like a sanctuary. They felt like a prison. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to make sense of it all. But it didn't make sense. It never had. I had spent my whole life providing, sacrificing, trying to be the father they needed, but in the end it wasn't enough. It never was. I walked into the kitchen, my hands trembling, the chill of the cold tile floor creeping up through my shoes, grounding me in the harsh reality of the moment. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting an unflattering, harsh glow over everything. The air was thick with the lingering smell of turkey and gravy, a scent that once symbolized warmth and togetherness, now a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. I stopped for a moment and stared at the reflection in the window. There I was, an old man, his hair gray, his face lined with the kind of exhaustion that could only come from years of giving everything and receiving nothing in return. I saw it in my eyes, the weariness that had settled in long before tonight. My reflection seemed foreign to me, a man I didn't recognize. How had it happened so quickly? How had I gone from being the center of their lives to the object of their disdain? The weight of it all hit me like a physical blow. My chest felt tight, constricted, as if someone had wrapped their hands around my ribs and squeezed. I reached up, rubbing my face as if that could somehow erase the words Fern had just spoken. The sound of her voice still echoed in my ears. The best gift you could give us would be if you just disappeared. It felt like a slap, sharp and unforgiving. And yet, it wasn't just the sting of her words. It was everything that led up to this moment. The years of sacrifice, the hours spent working late, the endless phone calls in the middle of the night when things broke, the constant stream of requests, of needs. I had been there every single time, never asking for anything in return, never expecting anything in return. But somehow, somewhere along the way, I had become nothing more than a burden, a paycheck, a tool. I splashed cold water on my face, hoping it would help clear the fog in my mind. But it didn't. The shock still hung in the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. The truth was there, staring me in the face in the dim kitchen light. The house, my house, the one I had worked for, slaved for, was no longer mine. It was a cage, a prison of my own making. For a moment, I leaned against the counter, feeling the coolness of the granite against my hands, trying to steady my breathing. The weight of the years, of everything I had done, crashed down on me. My mind drifted back to the beginning when I first made the decision to help. To buy this house, to co-sign the mortgage, to be there for Fern and her family when they needed it. But somewhere along the line, something had shifted. What had once been a gesture of love, of fatherly responsibility, had transformed into something else. I thought about the first time Fern asked for help. It had been years ago, back when she was still living in the apartment before the kids were born. She was 28, pregnant with Sophie, and Vernon was between jobs, as usual. She'd shown up at my old place, tears streaking down her face, holding a letter from the bank. "Dad," she'd said, her voice breaking, "they denied us for the loan. We need help. We don't know what to do." I had been stunned, of course. I had expected this day would come. Fern and Vernon had always been struggling. They couldn't seem to get their feet under them, no matter how hard they tried. So, like any father, I stepped in. I co-signed the loan. I gave them a little more than I should have, just to get them in the house. It was supposed to be a fresh start for them, a place where they could build a life for themselves, for their children. At first, it felt right. Fern had called me after the papers were signed, her voice full of gratitude, her words like a balm on an old wound. "Thank you, Dad. You don't know how much this means to me," she had said. That was the last time she'd called me Dad. That was the last time I'd heard any real warmth in her voice. But over the years, things changed. Fern and Vernon stopped calling unless they needed something. Money, advice, help with a repair. And I gave it all, without hesitation. The bills piled up, and I paid them. The emergencies came, and I fixed them. I became the one they leaned on. And for a long time, I thought that's what fathers did. That's what families did. They took care of each other. But now, standing in my kitchen, the truth was undeniable. The house had become my prison. Every payment I made, every sacrifice, had been building this invisible wall around me. A wall I couldn't see until Fern had thrown it in my face. She didn't need me. She didn't want me. She didn't care. My chest tightened again. The pain felt like a physical wound, one that wouldn't stop bleeding. I had given everything, and for what? A bitter comment on Thanksgiving. I felt my legs weaken as I turned away from the sink, my mind still spinning. I needed to do something, anything, to shake the weight of Fern's words. I grabbed the envelope from the counter, the one with the $5,000 check inside, and turned it over in my hands. For a moment, I just stared at it, the crinkled edges, the faint indentations from where I had gripped it so tightly. It was the last attempt I'd made to fix things, to show Fern that I was still trying, still willing to help. But it hadn't mattered. It wasn't about the money. It was about control. She didn't want my help anymore. She didn't want anything from me, except for me to disappear. The pain in my chest tightened again, sharper this time. I felt a knot in my stomach, a realization I hadn't wanted to face. I had been living in a fantasy where I thought I was doing the right thing by helping, a fantasy where I thought that one day they would look at me with gratitude, with appreciation. But that day was never going to come. I walked over to the kitchen table, my footsteps heavy, dragging with the weight of the decision I had been avoiding for years. The table was where it had all started. It had once been a place of warmth, of family dinners, of shared moments. Now it felt like a battlefield. It felt like everything had been destroyed here. I sat down, staring at the check in my hands. $5,000, enough to clear Fern's credit card debt, enough to ease her burdens, but not enough to change what had already been broken. The truth of it hit me like a tidal wave. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't the man they needed me to be. I was the man they resented, the man they wanted to escape from. I thought about all the times I had tried to make things better, all the ways I had tried to fix the broken pieces of their lives. I had spent my entire life trying to hold everything together. But now, I saw it for what it really was. I had been holding on to a sinking ship. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white. I was suffocating. I needed air. I needed space. The house, the walls, the kitchen, it was all closing in on me. With a deep breath, I stood up again, walking toward the back door, almost stumbling in my haste. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I had to get out of there. I couldn't stay in that house, surrounded by the ghosts of my own decisions. The kitchen door swung open with a creak, and the cold air hit me like a slap. I stepped outside, my breath coming out in visible clouds, sharp and cold against the night air. The snow crunched beneath my boots, each step heavier than the last. I didn't look back at the house. I couldn't. The place I had built with my own hands, the house that had once felt like home, now felt like a tomb. I walked further into the yard, the cold biting at my face, my fingers numb in the chill. I needed distance. I needed to think, to clear my mind. But all I could think about was Fern's face, cold and distant. And that, I realized, was the final straw. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep giving without receiving anything in return. I couldn't keep living in a prison of my own making, trapped by their expectations, their demands. It was time to make a change. The realization settled over me like the first snow of winter, unavoidable, silent, and heavy. If you'd like to expand any particular part further or adjust the pacing, let me know. I spent that night awake, my eyes staring at the city outside my window, but I wasn't really seeing it. The snow kept falling, soft and steady, covering everything in white. The world outside seemed to slow down, each flake drifting down, adding a quiet layer to the night. But inside, I felt like I was suffocating. The cold, clean silence of the night didn't offer any peace. Instead, it magnified the pounding in my chest, the gnawing discomfort that had settled deep within me. The house, the home I had worked so hard to build, to maintain, felt like it was closing in, as if the walls were inching closer with every passing moment. I turned away from the window, the pale light of the snow casting faint shadows on the walls. The room was too still, too heavy. My body felt as though it had been trapped in place for hours. Every muscle ached. My mind wouldn't stop, the thoughts spinning, circling back to the same places. Fern's words, her cold, detached tone, the lack of remorse in her eyes, the realization that nothing I did for her or her family would ever be enough. I tried to push it all away, but it kept coming back, like an endless loop. Every sacrifice, every penny I'd spent on that house, every moment I dedicated to providing for Fern and her family, none of it mattered. To Fern, I wasn't a father anymore. I wasn't someone to turn to for guidance or love or support. To her, I was a burden. I was just a paycheck, an obstacle she had to deal with to get what she wanted. It wasn't just Fern. Vernon's indifference had been worse than any outright insult. He never once stood up to defend me, never once questioned Fern's words or actions. It was as though I was invisible to him. He'd allowed her to manipulate me, to guilt me into giving, without ever offering anything in return. The weight of those years, the mortgage payments, the late nights, the feeling that I was always a step behind, was crushing. It wasn't just about the money either. It was about the time I had lost, the opportunities I had passed up, the dreams I had buried. I had given everything I had to build a life for Fern, for Vernon, for the kids. I thought it was my duty. I thought that's what fathers did. But now, as I sat there, the only thing I could hear in my head was Fern's voice. The best gift would be when you're no longer around. I closed my eyes and leaned back in the chair. The room felt small, the walls pressing in on me. I couldn't breathe. The harsh, sterile lights above were too bright, too unflattering. The house felt like a cage. No matter how many repairs I made, no matter how many times I wrote checks or fixed what broke, it was never enough. I glanced at the desk. The papers were still scattered there, the legal documents that tied me to this place, this life, the deed, the mortgage, the endless obligations I had taken on, believing that if I did the right thing, if I kept working, kept providing, things would eventually get better. But it was all a lie, a charade. I reached for the papers, my hands trembling slightly as I sorted through them. Each piece of paper was another weight on my chest, another chain that tied me to this place, to these people who couldn't care less about what I had done for them. I thought about the last 15 years, the years I had spent paying down this mortgage, the countless times I had bailed them out, fixed their problems, picked up the pieces. And all I got in return was Fern telling me she wanted me gone. I spread the papers out on the desk, the cold legal language blurring in front of my eyes. The house was mine. My name was on the deed. But what did that really mean? I had sacrificed my life for this. I had put everything I had into this house, into their future, and in return, I had become nothing more than a source of resentment. I had been blind, hadn't I? I had thought I was doing the right thing. I had believed that if I kept helping, kept giving, Fern would appreciate it. That Vernon would see what I was doing for them and be grateful. But I had misread it all. I had misread the signs. They weren't grateful. They weren't even aware of the sacrifices I had made. To them, I was just the man who paid the bills, fixed the roof, and stayed out of the way. But now, after everything, I could see it. I could see it clearly for the first time. They didn't need me. They didn't want me. And I had spent too many years convincing myself that they did. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight in my chest again. The air in the room felt thicker now, like it was made of all the years of giving without receiving anything in return. My eyes drifted to the window again, the snow still falling in a quiet, steady rhythm. But I didn't feel the calm that the snow was meant to bring. I didn't feel peace. I felt like I was drowning in my own decisions. But that was the moment, wasn't it? The moment when everything shifted. When the fog in my mind cleared. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep pretending like I was still in control, like I still had a place in their lives. I couldn't keep holding on to something that wasn't there anymore. I thought about the house, the walls that I had built with my own hands, the roof that had kept them warm, the foundation that had supported them. But it wasn't mine anymore. Not really. Not in the way I had imagined. Fern and Vernon didn't want me here. They didn't want my help, my sacrifices, my time. They had taken everything I had given them and twisted it into something ugly. By morning, the decision had been made. I would leave. For good. It wasn't easy. It wasn't something I had arrived at lightly. I had thought about it for years, in the quiet moments, in the late hours when I couldn't sleep. I had always pushed the thought away, convinced myself that I could fix it, that things would get better if I just kept giving, kept trying. But now I saw the truth. There was no fixing this. There was no getting back what had been lost. I sat there, staring at the papers, my mind racing. What now? Where would I go? What would I do? But the answers didn't matter yet. What mattered was that I had finally made the decision. I was done. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the falling snow. The city was quiet, still. It was strange to think that the world could be so peaceful while mine had just been shattered. I could feel it in my bones now, the weight lifting, the chains breaking. I had given everything I could give, and now it was time to let go. I took one last look at the house, at the life I had built. But I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel regret. I just felt free. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I walked to the desk, gathered up the papers, and folded them neatly. They were no longer a weight, no longer something I had to carry. The house would be theirs. The responsibility would be theirs. I wasn't their safety net anymore. I walked out of the room, my footsteps echoing through the empty house, the house that had once felt like home. But not anymore. I turned off the lights, one by one, until the house was dark. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't oppressive. It was just the absence of something I had carried for far too long. I knew what I had to do next. The next few days dragged by with the weight of impending change hanging over me, a constant pressure in my chest. Every morning I woke up with the same tight feeling in my gut, knowing that something had to be done, something final. I couldn't just keep living this half-life anymore, pretending that the people I had sacrificed everything for still cared. I spent hours on the phone, going through the motions of daily life, checking accounts, answering emails, buying groceries, and even fixing the leaky faucet in the kitchen that had been bothering me for months. But all of it felt distant, like I was moving through someone else's existence. My own life, my own choices, seemed so far away, as if I were on the outside looking in. My thoughts kept returning to the papers on my desk. The deed, the mortgage, the bills I had paid for the last 15 years. None of it had ever seemed to matter to Fern or Vernon. And after everything that had happened, I was done. I couldn't keep carrying the weight of their expectations. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon on the fourth day, I had made the call. I reached out to Mark Rivera, the lawyer I had worked with years ago during my construction days. He had been a solid man back then, someone I trusted. I needed that same trust now, more than ever. Mark was a tall man, lean and sharp-eyed, his once dark hair now speckled with salt and pepper. He'd built his practice from the ground up, moving from working for a big firm to branching out on his own. I knew him as a man who didn't waste words, a man who valued efficiency. His office had that same feel, clean lines, leather chairs, the faint smell of cigars lingering in the air, even though I knew he hadn't smoked in years. When I arrived the next morning, Mark was already seated behind his polished oak desk, looking every bit the successful lawyer he'd become. He gestured for me to sit, and I did, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I laid out the papers in front of him, my hands a little unsteady as I spread them out across the desk. The deed, the mortgage, the calculations I had made over the last few days, everything was there. Everything I needed to take control back. Mark studied them quietly for a few moments, scanning the legalese and financial breakdowns. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence, and for a moment I thought I might suffocate in it. Finally, he looked up at me, his brow furrowed in concern. "You've been paying the mortgage for 15 years?" he asked, his voice neutral, but his expression serious. I nodded slowly, not sure what else to say. The weight of it all was still there, the sense that I had been living in someone else's world, doing everything for everyone, but never being seen. "It's all in my name," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the whirlwind in my chest. "The house, the mortgage, everything. I've been doing it all, and I thought I was helping. But now, I need to know my options. I can't keep doing this anymore." Mark leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin thoughtfully as he absorbed what I was saying. His eyes flicked back to the papers on the desk, then back to me. He was taking it all in, weighing the situation. "Well, legally speaking," he began, his voice calm and measured, "you have every right to take the house back. You're the one who's been paying for it all these years. You own it, plain and simple. But—" he paused, letting the silence settle between us. "But Lem, this isn't just about money. This isn't just about contracts and deeds. You're talking about your family. You're talking about breaking everything apart." I felt the air thicken around us. The words landed like heavy stones, each one sinking deeper into the ground. Mark wasn't wrong. I had spent the last 15 years thinking that if I just kept doing the right thing, helping, supporting, paying the bills, everything would eventually work out. I thought that Fern and Vernon would eventually come to see how much I had done for them, that they would be grateful. But now I could see the truth. It wasn't about gratitude. It was about control. It was about manipulation. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I sat back in the chair, staring at the papers in front of me. The weight of Mark's words was heavy, and I needed a moment to process them. I had been fighting with myself for days, trying to figure out what was the right thing to do. What could I do that wouldn't leave me suffocating in my own house, in my own decisions? "I know," I said finally, my voice quieter now. "But they've already broken it, Mark. Fern made it clear she doesn't want me around anymore. She told me, flat out, that she would rather I just disappear. That's the reality I'm facing now." My chest tightened again, the hurt creeping back in, but I pushed it down. This wasn't about feelings anymore. This wasn't about what Fern had said. This was about what I needed. I took a slow breath. I've been their safety net for too long. I've been their bank, their repairman, their problem solver, and I've done it willingly, thinking they needed me. But they don't. Fern doesn't. And I'm done, Mark. I'm done with all of it. Mark studied me carefully, as though trying to assess whether I was sure. I could see the skepticism in his eyes. He knew me, knew that I was a man who had always tried to do the right thing, even when it hurt. But there was no hesitation now. The decision had been made, and nothing was going to change it. He leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "If you go through with this, Lem, there's no going back. You'll be cutting ties with your daughter, with your grandchildren. This will change everything. You're not just taking back the house. You're severing your relationship with them." I felt a pang in my chest at the thought, but it wasn't enough to make me hesitate. "I don't think I have a choice anymore, Mark," I said, my voice tight but resolute. "It's already broken. They don't want me, and I can't keep pretending that everything's fine. It's not fine." Mark nodded slowly, still watching me with those sharp eyes of his. "All right. We'll proceed carefully then. I'll draw up the papers. You'll need to formally serve them with notice. We can start the eviction process. It won't be quick, but it'll be effective." The word eviction hung in the air like smoke. It felt surreal, but also inevitable. They hadn't left me any other choice. Fern had made it clear that she didn't want me around, so why should I keep fighting for a place in her life that wasn't mine anymore? "Do I need to be there when it happens?" I asked, already thinking about how to avoid the confrontation. The thought of seeing Fern's face, of having her react to the papers, made my stomach twist. "No," Mark said, his voice steady. "You don't have to be there. In fact, it might be better if you're not. We'll file the papers, and then they'll have the legally required time to vacate the property. If they don't, we'll go through the formal eviction process. But I suggest you be prepared for some fallout." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. I wasn't looking forward to the fallout. I wasn't even sure how I was going to handle it. But there was no way around it now. The papers would be served, the process would begin, and I would be free. Free from their control. Free from the suffocating weight of my own decisions. "Thanks, Mark," I said, my voice sounding small in the large, empty office. "I appreciate it. I need this to be over." Mark gave a short, tight smile. "I get it, Lem. I really do. I'll get the papers drawn up and call you when they're ready. We'll move fast." I stood up, my knees feeling a little weaker than usual. The weight of what I was about to do, the finality of it, was settling in now. I felt the sharpness of my decision. There would be no turning back. I walked out of Mark's office, the door closing quietly behind me. The air in the hallway was cooler, a stark contrast to the warmth of his office. I stepped outside feeling the chill of the morning on my face, and I took a deep breath. It wasn't over yet, but it would be soon. The cold air hit me hard, like a slap, but it also felt freeing. It felt like I could finally breathe again. The days that followed after my meeting with Mark felt like a blur. Each moment seemed to slip through my fingers, a whirlwind of legal consultations, phone calls, paperwork, and decisions. It was as though I were moving through a dream, distant and unfocused, yet entirely aware of the consequences lurking just beyond the horizon. I had made my choice. Now I was taking action. Every single step felt like a weight being lifted, but at the same time, I knew there was no going back. No rewinding the clock, no fixing the damage. The air in my lungs felt a little lighter with each day, but there was still a constant, underlying heaviness, a reminder that the world I had known was being dismantled with each stroke of the pen, each signature, each transfer. The first thing I did was pay off the mortgage. Every last cent of it. I could have stretched it out, paid in increments, drawn it out over time. But no, I needed it to be done. I had to sever the last connection to that house, to the life I had built for Fern and her family. It wasn't easy. It wasn't even a little bit easy. I had to dip into my retirement savings to cover it, the last financial cushion I had left. But I did it. I transferred the money, the final sum, into the bank account. The transaction cleared almost instantly. Just like that, the house was mine, completely. The years of payments, of sacrifice, of taking on debts and responsibilities I didn't always have the strength for, were now behind me. But the price of that freedom hit me harder than I had expected. My mind raced as I sat at the desk, staring at the confirmation email, the official notice that the house was paid off in full, that it now belonged entirely to me. I had expected relief, but what I felt was emptiness. I didn't want the house. I didn't want the weight of all those years to drag me down. What I wanted was to be free. Free from Fern's disappointment, free from Vernon's indifference, free from the constant sense that I was failing them. I tried not to think about the consequences, not to dwell on what would happen when Fern and Vernon realized what I had done. The letter was already written in my mind. It would be simple, straightforward, nothing emotional, nothing personal, just cold, hard facts. It was all I could manage at this point. The thought of confronting them, of seeing their faces when they read those words, didn't make me feel strong. It made me feel small, insignificant, like I was already preparing for the fallout. But the decision had been made. There was no turning back. The letter was the hardest part. I sat in front of the desk, my hands resting on the paper. It was white and clean, sterile. Unlike the confusion and emotions swirling in my chest, I had always been someone who valued clarity, clear, concise communication, without the fluff or the pretense. This was no different. The more I thought about it, the clearer the words became. I picked up the pen, my fingers still slightly unsteady, but I forced myself to stay focused. Vernon, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. The house at 342 Oak Street is no longer yours. You have 14 days to vacate the property. If you are still here after that, I will proceed with legal eviction. Lem. I set the pen down slowly, my hand trembling for a moment. I had known what the letter would say. I had written it 100 times in my mind. But now that it was real, now that I had put it down on paper, it felt final. It felt like a line being drawn in the sand, one that couldn't be crossed again. I read it once more. It wasn't cruel. It was necessary. For so long, I had been their safety net, their fallback, their fixer, but I couldn't keep doing it. I couldn't keep putting myself in a position where my every move was scrutinized, my every decision questioned. It was time to let go, time to make them stand on their own 2 feet, even if it meant they would hate me for it. I looked at the letter again, but this time, I didn't feel sadness. I felt clear. For the first time in months, maybe years, I could breathe without the weight of guilt pressing down on me. I was doing this for myself. It wasn't until late that evening that I found myself in the kitchen, staring at the letter in my hands, trying to find the right place for it. I had already packed my bags, prepared everything I needed for the next phase of my life. But the house was still there, still in my possession. It was the final connection I had to everything I had tried to hold on to. I walked slowly to the kitchen counter, setting the letter down in front of me. There it was, the cold, harsh truth laid out in black ink. I looked at it for a long moment, my mind swirling as I tried to find the last bit of resolve in me. It wasn't just the letter. It was the weight of everything that had come before it. The years of giving, the years of sacrifices made for people who never once stopped to consider the cost to me. And now I was choosing myself, choosing my own freedom. I reached over and picked up the crystal vase Maria had bought for our wedding. It was beautiful, delicate and strong all at once. Maria had always believed in family. She had believed that we could hold it together, that we could fix whatever needed fixing. I had spent years trying to keep her belief alive, even after she was gone. But it had become clear that the family I had built was not the one Maria had imagined. I set the vase down gently next to the letter. It seemed right somehow, symbolic. Maria had always been the one who believed in the power of family, in the importance of keeping everyone close. But now, I was choosing something different. I was choosing myself. I wasn't breaking the family apart, not exactly. But I was breaking free, and there was a difference. I stepped back from the counter, taking a deep breath. The house was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft creak of the floorboards. I felt something in the air, something that wasn't quite a weight anymore. It was a shift, something deep and irreversible. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my life again. The time had come. It was time to leave. I didn't look back when I walked out the door. I didn't glance at the house as I drove away. It wasn't mine anymore. It hadn't been mine for years, not in any meaningful way. But now, with the papers signed, with the letter placed on the counter, I was free. free to live the rest of my life without the weight of their expectations, without the constant sense of obligation that had hung over me like a cloud. I turned the car onto the main road and headed out of Oak Park, the place I had called home for so long. The snow was still falling gently, dusting the streets with a quiet, steady rhythm. Everything outside seemed calm, untouched. It was a perfect metaphor, one I hadn't recognized until now. My life, too, was covered in a fresh layer of snow. Something new, something clean. The old tracks were gone. There was no going back. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. I didn't wait for Fern to call. I didn't answer her texts. I didn't care. The decision had been made, and there was no point in second-guessing it now. The letters had been delivered, the mortgage paid off, the house taken back. I had made my choice, and everything had been set in motion. For the first time in years, I felt the strange, liberating pull of freedom. It was as though a weight had been lifted off my chest, a weight I didn't even realize I'd been carrying until it was gone. It wasn't that I didn't care about what Fern might say, or about the consequences that would follow my decision. I had already spent too many years caring too much, sacrificing my own peace for theirs. And look where it had gotten me. Nothing but resentment and cold, hard words. I had poured myself into the life I thought I was building for my family, only to realize that they didn't want me in it. They didn't need me. Fern's message had been the final straw. Her words were clear, sharp as a blade, cutting through the years of effort and care I had given. "The best gift would be if you just disappeared," she had said. That simple, dismissive line had been the confirmation I needed. I wasn't a father anymore. I was a problem to be solved, a burden to be removed. And so, I removed myself. There was a strange kind of peace in that. A quiet, soft acceptance that this was what had to happen. And in that peace, I found a surprising clarity, something I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't anger or bitterness that I was left with. No, it was something more profound. It was the sense that I was finally doing something for myself, something that would no longer be dictated by the needs of others. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about what Fern or Vernon thought of me. I wasn't tethered to their expectations, their manipulations, their demands. I was free. The phone was silent, and that silence was more deafening than any noise. I knew Fern would call. She would have to. She would have questions. She would be angry. She would want answers. But I didn't pick up. I didn't even check the messages. What was there to say? I had already said everything I needed to say in that cold, official letter. What else was left? The first few hours after I left the house were quiet, filled with the distant hum of my own thoughts. I didn't drive aimlessly, though I could have. I didn't wander the streets like I might have done in some dramatic movie scene. I just packed my things and prepared to leave, just as I'd promised myself I would. There was no room for guilt, no room for hesitation. I had to keep moving forward. I couldn't afford to look back. I spent the night in a small hotel, a nondescript place that smelled faintly of mildew, but it didn't matter. It was far from the house, far from everything I had spent the last 15 years trying to hold together. It wasn't luxurious, but it was just what I needed, a quiet, anonymous space to be alone with my thoughts. I could have stayed home a few more days, I suppose. I could have tried to talk to Fern or Vernon, explain myself, maybe apologized for what had happened. But the truth was, I was done explaining. I had spent too many years making excuses for them, trying to justify my decisions, trying to explain why I was doing what I thought was right. They hadn't listened, and they wouldn't listen now. And I was tired. Tired of fighting battles that weren't mine to fight anymore. Tired of defending my right to exist in a family that didn't seem to care about me. The plane ticket to Hawaii had been a last-minute decision. I could have gone anywhere, Florida, California, maybe even back to New York where I grew up. but something about Hawaii felt right. It felt like the place I needed to be. A new chapter. A place where I could breathe freely without the weight of the past on my shoulders. I didn't look back. I just went to the airport, checked in, and boarded the flight. The entire time, there was a strange sense of calm that washed over me, like I was finally doing what I had been too afraid to do for years. I wasn't running from something. I was running toward something, toward freedom, toward a life where I could exist without constantly measuring my worth by how much I could give to others. When I landed in Hawaii, the warmth of the air hit me instantly. The humidity was thick, but it felt refreshing after the months of cold and isolation back home. The sun was setting on the horizon, the sky a beautiful mix of oranges, purples, and reds. I stepped off the plane and into the tropical air, feeling the weight of the long flight lift from my shoulders with each step. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do next. I had a few ideas, maybe rent a small place by the beach, spend my days walking the sand, learning to surf, something simple. Maybe I'd write. I didn't really know. What I did know was that I needed to get away from everything. From the house, from Fern, from Vernon, from the years of obligation and resentment that had built up between us. I needed to find myself again. I needed to reconnect with a part of me that had been buried under the weight of trying to be everything to everyone. The cab ride to the hotel was quiet. The driver was friendly enough, but I didn't feel like making small talk. I just wanted to get to the hotel and settle in. As we drove through the streets of Honolulu, I realized just how far removed I was from my old life. Everything felt new. The buildings were different. The palm trees swayed in the breeze, the ocean rolling quietly in the background. It was as if I had just stepped into a different world, a world where the past didn't matter. The hotel was nothing fancy, just a small, unassuming place by the beach. It was simple, but it had everything I needed: a bed, a shower, a balcony overlooking the ocean. I dropped my bags on the floor and walked out onto the balcony, breathing in the salty air. I could hear the waves crashing against the shore in the distance, a soft, constant sound that was almost hypnotic. The world felt different here. I felt different here. I leaned against the railing, closing my eyes for a moment, just listening to the sound of the ocean. It wasn't a cure for everything. I knew that. The pain of what I had done, the hurt of cutting ties with my family, it wasn't going to disappear overnight. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something for myself. I was carving out space in my life for me. And that, I realized, was the most important thing I could do. I wasn't worried about what Fern or Vernon would think. I wasn't concerned about the fallout from my decision. I was no longer tied to their expectations, their guilt, their anger. I was finally free to live my life, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. The next few days were filled with simple pleasures. I walked along the beach, letting the warm water wash over my feet, feeling the sand between my toes. I had forgotten how good it felt to be alone with my thoughts, without anyone demanding anything from me. I spent hours sitting by the shore, reading books I'd put off for years, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors I'd never seen before. There was a lightness to it all, a sense of renewal. Fern called once. I saw her name flash across the screen, but I didn't answer. It wasn't out of anger or spite. I just knew that it wasn't the right time to talk. I had to give myself space before I could even begin to think about what the future with her might look like. For now, all I needed was this: peace, space, time to figure out who I was without being defined by my role in someone else's life. I was going to live for me, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to do it. Hawaii was everything I had dreamed of, and more. It was the kind of place I'd only seen in pictures before, those beautiful, idyllic snapshots that showed the world's most tranquil beaches, its calm, endless ocean, and the kind of relaxed way of life I had longed for, but never had the courage to live. Now, standing on the island, feeling the soft, warm breeze against my skin, I finally understood why people spoke of this place with such reverence. The moment I stepped off the plane, something inside me shifted. The oppressive weight of the life I had left behind seemed to dissolve into the warm air. I had always been tethered to the responsibilities of home, paying the bills, fixing things, helping Fern, supporting Vernon. It had become so ingrained in my existence that I hadn't even realized how much of me had been tied to their needs, their demands, until it was all gone. Hawaii was the escape I never knew I needed. The freedom here was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. I wasn't running away from something. I was running toward something, toward the space to just breathe, to live in the moment, to be me again without the burden of guilt or expectation weighing on me. I spent my days lounging on the beach, lying on the soft sand with my eyes closed, letting the warmth of the sun sink into my skin. I could hear the rhythmic sound of the waves crashing against the shore, steady and comforting. The ocean was constant, unbothered by anything, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to be as free as it was. I had never been someone who sat still for long. At home, there was always something to do. Work to finish, a bill to pay, a phone call to return. I had lived a life of constant motion, of always being needed, always being responsible. But here, in this small corner of paradise, time seemed to slow down. I would wake up in the morning, grab a coffee, and take a walk along the shoreline. I'd watch the sun rise over the horizon, and then I'd let myself forget about everything else. No more obligations, no more guilt, no more control. I spent hours reading books I'd left untouched for years. Novels, poetry, travel guides, anything that felt like it could pull me away from my own head, from the life I had left behind. I'd sit on the beach for hours, the book forgotten in my lap, simply watching the waves. The ebb and flow of the water became a kind of meditation. It reminded me of something I had long forgotten, how to be still, how to just be. In the evenings, I would walk into town, grab a bite at a local cafe, and sit outside, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange, pink, and purple. It was a scene I had only ever witnessed in pictures, but here, it was mine. I didn't have to share it with anyone. There was no one pulling me away from the moment, no one demanding my time or my attention. It was just me and the world. I didn't look back. Not once. I thought about Fern sometimes, sure. I thought about the way she had looked at me that last time, her eyes cold and indifferent as she told me she wished I were gone. It hurt, but that pain had started to fade, like a scar that had healed over. What I had once feared was now something I embraced. The distance between us was growing, and with each passing day, the hurt was being replaced with something else, something new, something more akin to relief. I didn't need to feel responsible for them anymore. I didn't need to bear the weight of their resentment or guilt. I had spent too many years trying to fix everything, trying to hold on to a family that was already broken. Now, I was free to start over. The days seemed to blend together in a haze of sunlight and salt water. Time was a distant thing here. There was no rush, no urgency. Everything moved at its own pace, a rhythm I could feel deep in my bones. I started to find a new rhythm for myself, too. I would wake up without an alarm, go for a walk, watch the sunrise, and then decide what to do next. Maybe I'd go to the market, pick up some fresh fruit, or perhaps I'd spend the day at a cafe, writing, or just observing the world. Whatever I did, it was my choice. At night, I would sit on the balcony of the small rental apartment I had found, watching the stars stretch across the sky. The sky here felt bigger somehow, more expansive. I could see constellations I had never noticed before, and in the stillness, I began to realize how small my old life had been. how constricted I had allowed myself to become. Hawaii gave me the space to breathe again, to remember who I was outside of the role I had been playing for so long, and in that space, I started to rediscover the person I had buried beneath the weight of obligation. I didn't expect it to happen so soon. The sense of me had always been there, somewhere beneath the layers of responsibility, of caregiving, of doing what I thought was best for everyone else. But now, that sense of self was rising to the surface. It was more than just the absence of obligation. It was the presence of choice. I could choose how I spent my days. I could choose how I spent my time. I could choose to sit on the beach and watch the waves, or I could choose to hike to a hidden waterfall and listen to the sound of water rushing over rocks. I could choose to do absolutely nothing, and it was enough. In those quiet moments of solitude, something inside me softened. I stopped feeling sorry for myself. I stopped blaming myself for what had happened. I could finally see it clearly. I had done what I thought was right for so long, but it wasn't my responsibility to fix everything, to be everything for everyone. It was time for me to live for me. And for the first time in my life, I could admit that it felt good. It felt like I had been given permission I didn't need to ask for, to take up space in this world, to live for myself without the weight of anyone else's expectations dragging me down. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to face it. I wasn't sure if Fern would ever understand my decision, or if we would ever be able to talk again. I wasn't sure if Vernon would ever reach out, or if the silence between us would last forever. But what I did know was this: I wasn't going to wait for them anymore. I wasn't going to let their needs and their expectations define my life. This was mine. This was freedom. I stood on the beach, watching the waves roll in. The sun was low on the horizon now, casting long shadows over the sand. I let the cool water lap at my feet, the soft crash of the waves against the shore steady and calming. For the first time in years, I felt at peace, and that was enough. Months passed. In the beginning, I was sure it would take longer to move on, to shake off the years of guilt, the constant worry, the feeling that I was always just one step away from being the man they needed me to be. But surprisingly, the transition wasn't as difficult as I had anticipated. Hawaii had given me the room I needed to breathe. The air here was different, light, free. It had become a kind of sanctuary, a place where I could learn to live for myself, without feeling the weight of other people's expectations bearing down on me. I had grown accustomed to the peaceful rhythm of my days, the sound of the ocean, the endless blue sky. My thoughts, once clouded with the noise of family obligations, had cleared. I didn't think about Fern much anymore. Or at least, I didn't dwell on the bitterness I once felt toward her. It was hard not to think about her entirely, not after everything that had happened. But I had made my peace with the situation. I had done what I needed to do for my own sanity, for my own life. And for the first time in years, I had begun to feel what it was like to truly be free. I spent my days as I pleased, long walks on the beach, days spent reading or writing, nights with nothing but the sound of the waves and the hum of the crickets in the distance. I met a few people along the way, mostly tourists like me, or locals who were just as content to enjoy their own version of peace. I found comfort in my solitude, in the absence of drama and responsibility. But as the months passed, the weight of the past seemed to fade, like an old scar that eventually stops hurting. That was until one afternoon, when my phone rang. It was an unassuming afternoon, the kind that had become my favorite since I arrived. The air was warm, but not hot, with a gentle breeze rustling the palm leaves. I had spent the morning wandering through a local market, picking up fruit, and just enjoying the ease of life here. When I returned to my small apartment by the beach, the phone was on the counter, blinking with a missed call. I hadn't checked my voicemail in a while. Didn't feel the need to, really. But this time, for some reason, I picked up the phone and hit the button. "Hey, Dad," came Fern's voice, softer than I remembered. "It's me. I don't know if you'll even listen to this, but I need to say something. I'm sorry. I didn't mean what I said before. I didn't mean to push you away like that." For a moment I was stunned. Her words hung in the air like a cloud, but the feeling that came over me wasn't what I expected. It wasn't relief, or even anger. It was indifference. No, that wasn't the right word. It wasn't that I didn't care. It was more like I had already come to terms with everything she had said, everything that had happened. I had made my decision, and now, months later, her apology didn't feel like a lifeline. It felt like a hollow echo of something I had left behind. I leaned against the counter, staring out at the view of the ocean beyond. The gentle sound of the waves was still there, steady and unchanging, just like it had been the day I left. Fern's voice, though, was different. There was something tentative in it, something that sounded almost fragile. I could hear the uncertainty in her words, the way they wavered as if she wasn't entirely sure whether I would even hear her out. "Dad, I don't know. She hesitated, the silence on the other end of the line stretching for a moment. "I'm sorry. I really am. I never should have said what I did. I was just angry, and I didn't know how to say it. I didn't mean for things to end this way." I took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, trying to collect my thoughts. The past few months had been about learning to live without the constant sense of responsibility, without the weight of being the fixer, the provider. I had let go of the guilt and resentment that had defined my relationship with Fern. I had made my choice, and that choice had led me here, to a place where I could finally breathe without the pressure of family demands. But now, here she was, calling me again. I wasn't angry, and I wasn't resentful either. It had taken me some time to get to that point, but now I could see things clearly. The truth was, I didn't need to explain myself to her anymore. I had already done everything I could for her, everything that had been asked of me, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I owed her an explanation. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I could hear Fern's breath on the other end of the line, waiting for me to respond. She had made the call, but it felt like she was the one who needed something from me now, something I couldn't give her. "Dad?" she said softly, breaking the silence. "Are you there?" I thought about it for a moment, weighing the situation. There was nothing I could say that would change the past, nothing I could say that would undo the hurt and the distance between us. I had done what I needed to do, and now I was living the life I had chosen. "I'm here," I said, my voice steady, even. "But Fern, I've already moved on." It wasn't meant to be harsh. It wasn't even meant to sound cold. It was just the truth. I had moved on. I had let go of the guilt, of the responsibility, of the need to fix things that were beyond fixing. And as much as I had once wished for things to be different, to have a normal relationship with her again, I realized now that it wasn't going to happen. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about everything that happened," I continued, my words deliberate but not angry. "And I've made my peace with it. I had to let go, Fern. I had to let go of the idea that I could fix everything for you and your family. I had to let go of being your crutch, your backup. I was never going to be happy living that way." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could imagine her standing there, phone pressed to her ear, the silence hanging between us like an awkward weight. "I know," she finally said, her voice small, almost a whisper. "I know, Dad. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't—" But I stopped her. "Fern, it's not about that anymore. It's not about you hurting me or me hurting you. It's about what we both need. I can't keep holding on to this. I've let go, and for the first time in a long time I feel like I can breathe. I'm not waiting for you to need me anymore. I'm not waiting for anything. I'm living for myself now. There was a heavy silence again, and for a moment I wondered if she was crying. Maybe she was. Maybe she wasn't. It didn't matter anymore. I get it, Fern finally said, her voice trembling slightly. I understand. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension leave my shoulders. Good. I hope you do. But this isn't about me or you anymore. It's about you figuring out what you need, what you want out of your life. And it's about me doing the same. Another silence stretched on the line, but this time it felt less like an obstacle and more like an acceptance of the distance that had grown between us. I wasn't angry and I wasn't heartbroken. I was just at peace. At peace with the fact that the relationship we once had was gone and I couldn't bring it back. I'm sorry, Dad, she whispered. I really am. I didn't mean to push you away. I know you didn't, I said, my voice softening. But sometimes we do things we don't mean, and sometimes those things change everything. It's not about blame anymore. It's just the way it is. For a moment, I thought she might say something else, but then the line went quiet again. There were no more words left to say, no more apologies to make. Take care of yourself, Fern, I said, my voice calm but firm. I wish you the best. And with that, I hung up the phone. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for Fern to need me. I wasn't waiting for anything. I had moved on.